about algebra, which is, of course, we've got whole courses dedicated to the topic, so we're not going to cover the whole thing. What we're going to do is look at algebra in the context of problem solving, and specifically, what I want to do is take what we did in week 6, which was guess and check, something that you should all be very familiar with by now after all the problems we've done on problem sets. We're going to take those guess and check problems and figure out how to turn them into an algebra equation and solve them that way. So what I'm going to do is go back to the first problem we looked at in our guess and check section in the book when we were talking about it back in week 6, I believe it was. It went something like this. Jake had $2 in nickels and dimes. He had twice as many dimes as nickels. How many of each did he have? And so if you remember, what we did was we had a guess of nickels. So we made a column, and then the way we would suggest doing this was make a guess. 3. And then the next column over, what else can we figure out from that? Well, if we know that he had twice as many dimes as nickels, now we can figure out the dimes being 6. Alright, so then what we did was we said, alright, what is the, let's call this, I can't remember what we labeled it back in week 6, but I'm going to call this dollar amount of nickels. And so to do this, we multiplied 3 times, I'm going to use parentheses as my times the value of a nickel, 0.05. And that gave us, what did that give us? 15. So this would be 15 cents. Alright, then we did the same for dimes. Let's use clear labels here. Dollar amount is what we're looking for here. Get back on track. So the dollar amount of dimes, now I just took my 6 here and multiplied that times the value of a dime, and that gave me 60 cents. Alright, and then we added those together, and let's call this column total amount. And the total amount was just the amounts added together, so this gave us 75 cents. And then we rated that guess, and I think back in week 6 I put my rating over here. You're rating the guess, and we're at this point we're assuming that that's too low. Now I might have to come back and switch that. So let me go through one more guess. Suppose we guessed next that it was 10, and this would be 20. Then this would be 50 cents. Your dimes amount then would be $2. And we're over the $2 that he had total. So we know that this rating was correct because when we went higher, now we went too high. Alright, so what we want to do now is not continue on this way. I want to try figuring out an algebraic equation that I can solve that'll tell me the exact amount of nickels. And the reason this might be useful, or more useful, or maybe I should say more appealing than a guess and check chart sometimes, is that this number that I'm trying to get might not be an exact, a nice whole number. Now, of course, in this example, we're looking at a whole number of nickels, so it's pretty easy to continue on with the guess and check. But what I'm getting at is what the answer came out to be 3.37259. That would take us a long time to guess 5 different decimals. Or even worse, what if the guess, and to be fair, this won't happen in our class, but in general it could. What if the answer turned out to be square root of 3? There's no way we're going to guess that. So coming up with an algebraic equation is useful, but using a guess and check chart to build that equation is the key here. So here's how you do it. Come up with a variable for your guess. So a lot of people like x because we're familiar with x as a variable. Feel free to do that. I'm going to use n. It's a little more descriptive. It tells me the variable that I'm solving for is going to be the number of nickels. If I use x, I'll just have to remember at the end that I'm solving for nickels. All right, now my next column over was the number of dimes. So look at your chart and say, all right, what did I do to get the next number in the D column, the dimes column? Should probably be a little more descriptive in my columns. So what did we have to do? We had to double it each time. So the way you write this in algebra land is I multiplied the thing that was in the first column, now n, and I multiply that by 2. So in algebra land, I just write that as 2n. Alright, so now we come to the dollar amount of nickels. And so if you think about what we did here, we took the value that was in the first column and multiplied it times the value of a nickel, which is 0.05. So in other words, I took the value that's in the first column, which is n now, and I multiplied that by 0.05. Now this isn't how we usually write things when we're in algebra. Usually the number comes first, and then the variable comes second. So the way this would look would be 0.05 n. Alright, now I do the same thing here. I'm going to take the value of, for the dollar amount of dimes, I'm going to take the value of dime, 0.10, or just 0.1, and multiply times, well, in this case, we multiplied times what we saw in the second column, multiplied by the second column. So here, on this row, I'm going to multiply by 2n. The way you do that is multiply with parentheses 2n. So just for clarity, this is a 0.10 times 2n. And what I want my total amount to be, or how I got this total amount column, I added the things in the dollar amount nickels and the dollar amount dimes columns. Right? I just added those together. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to add the 0.05n plus the 0.102n. So it looks like this. 0.05n plus 0.10 times 2n. And then finally, I have my equation once I set this equal to what I want my dollar amount to be. And that is the $2. So the total dollar amount of each nickels and dimes I want to add up to equal $2. Alright, now comes the fun part. So that's setting up the equation. We used our guess and check table to set up the equation. So now we have to actually solve this equation. So if you're rusty on algebra, I'm going to go through this step by step. But if you're more comfortable with algebra, feel free to, these algebra steps and rules, feel free to skip forward a little bit until you see me off this equation and get an answer. So there's nothing to do for this first piece. I'm just going to rewrite that as 0.05n. But this next piece, keep in mind, this is multiplying 0.1 times 2 times n. So I can actually multiply in any order, meaning I can multiply the 0.1 and the 2 together. So I'm going to get, and you can do this in your calculator, but you're going to get 0.2 or 0.20 if you want the trailing 0. But then we have an n equals 2. And I'm going to drop the decimals here because they don't add anything to the information. 2 is the same as 2.00. All right, now algebra says I can add these like terms, that is, the things that both have the same variable. So I've got some number times n plus some number times n. I can add those numbers together. So I add the 0.05 plus the 0.2 to get 0.25n equals 2. And then I divide both sides by the thing in front of n. I'm dividing by 0.25. And if you plug that into your calculator, so these go away and you're left with just n, which is what we want. And if you plug this into your calculator, you get 8. Now be careful, because we have solved the equation, it is true, but we haven't answered the question. That is, how many of each did he have? So we know if n is 8, we could say d equals 16, but we still haven't answered the question. We know that the variable n is 8, and the variable d is 16, although this is the first time we've seen the variable d. But the answer to the question will be written out in a full sentence. So he had 8 nickels, nickels, and 16 dimes. And this would be your answer. Now, just to check, that does indeed equal $2. 8 nickels would be 40 cents, and 16 dimes is $1.60. If you add those together, you do indeed get $2. Check. So let's stop here with this basic example, try some of the problems in the book, and then go on and watch the next video, which will go over some slightly more interesting examples. Mixture problems for one, investment problems are another common type of slightly more challenging but similar idea problems where we want to convert a guess and check chart to algebra. Okay, good luck and catch me on Discord if you have any questions.